Well, hey everybody, welcome to Virtual Rooted Week 2 of our new series Made for Mondays. We're now in the second week. Looking forward to it. We're going to have 2 more weeks after this. But before we go any further, I want to give a huge shout out to Mr. Andrew Beaver for winning the Trick Shot Challenge. Congratulations, Andrew. You won with your pool shots. That was awesome. Congratulations. Good job. So last week we introduced the Made for Mondays series, and we're talking about work. And when I say the word work, maybe negative things come to your mind. I think negative things come to a lot of our minds. Working, and I'm not talking about just formally paid jobs, where maybe you think of your parents, you think of adults, like, oh, they go to work. Well, I just go to school. I don't do work. Well, maybe I do chores, maybe I do this, but I don't do work. And I hope that last week I started to introduce this idea that work is so much more than just a job that maybe adults have or your parents have, or even some of you high schoolers that have jobs. It's not just that, and then, oh, now when I get a full-time job. Working is everything that we do that's not really relaxing. In some ways, it's everything we do that's not resting or relaxing. There's work that you like to do, that other people like to do, that I might like to do, but then there's work that you don't like to do, that other people might not like to do. We're different in how God has wired us. So there are some chores and tasks, the things that people simply don't like to do, that other people say, I don't really mind them. So we're going to hear from some of you guys right now saying some of the things that you're okay with, that you like, and some of the things that you're not okay with or you don't really like to do. So take a look.
Types of work that I enjoy doing include any sort of physical activity like running or carrying my instrument in marching band, and I also like vacuuming. And then the types of work that I don't like doing are like washing the dishes or taking out the trash.
Something that I like to do would be working with kids or doing things for other people. And then work that I don't like to do is doing things that would benefit me over someone else.
Alright, my favorite kind of work is going out to feed the animals because I really like my animals and the outdoors. And my least favorite work is most likely school because it's boring.
Okay, some work that I like doing are folding laundry. I like helping out with like kids and stuff, so like VBS, nursery, like babysitting, and I like practices for sports. Some things I don't like doing for work are doing the dishes and doing yard work.
My favorite kind of work is in Animal Crossing, when I have to harvest all of the fruits off all of my trees and make hundreds of thousands of bells to then turn into turnips, and then play the stock market and then get millions of bells so that I can pay off my house debt.
Some jobs I like to do are things like organizing, vacuuming, and picking up the house. But some jobs I do not like to do are the dishes, cleaning the cat's litter box, or going outside and picking the weeds in the garden.
Right, my least favorite type of work would have to be retail work at Quick Trip. And then my favorite type of work to do during the week would honestly be just vacuuming and sweeping the house, just making it clean again.
I was reminded of a time when I was in high school. So I was a junior, a sophomore, I don't really know. And a friend of mine, Tom, and we got kind of crazy doing stuff sometimes. And we, at one point, shared a locker. And I don't even really know why, but we shared a locker. We wanted to use the other locker as storage. And I remember one time, so that'll be important in a minute, we were conspiring against another friend. And this friend's name is Jerry. And we were going to put garbage in his locker. So what we did is late one day when most people left the building, but the building's not closed down, we took a huge bag of garbage and we put it in his locker and shut it so that when he opened his locker, it would all come spilling out. And everybody's locker had combinations, and we have been talking about doing a joke like this, and then one day we're walking through the hallway and we look up and this piece of paper just floats down from the sky and it lands in our hands. And we saw him walking in the balcony up above on the second floor of the school. And it was his student information, which includes your locker. And we're like, well, that just quite literally fell from the sky. Now we got to do this. So we got his locker combo. We put locker in his garbage. And what ended up happening was he went to his locker. He opened up his locker and liquid and garbage had fallen out and gone everywhere on the floor, and a crowd started to form around his locker. People like, what's going on? Because it smelled horrible. All this trash is everywhere. And a teacher eventually comes up and says, who did this? Like, tell me who did this. They're going to be in trouble. And he knows, at this point he knew it was us, but he's trying to protect us. He's like, I don't want to get mad at them, but he doesn't really want us to get in big trouble. So he's like, oh, I got it. And the teacher finally left him alone, but the teacher didn't and went to check the security cameras. The teacher checked the security cameras, and it turns out you couldn't see who it was going in and out of frame. So they eventually put in a new security camera. So Jerry is mad. He's upset. He's like, guys, we could all get in trouble. What are you doing? So I started smooth talking Jerry. I was like, well, you know what, Tom made me do this, and let's get him back. So Jerry's like, yeah, let's get him back. So Jerry came up with an idea. Let's take bananas and mush them up inside of Tom's books in his locker. And I thought, wow, that sounds like a good idea. Not thinking, that's my own locker. So I went, opened up my own locker that I shared with Tom. We mushed up a bunch of bananas and we put them in the locker. So the next day, Tom comes, he opens up his school books that he has to pay for if they're ruined, by the way. And they're full of mushed up bananas and the rest of the bananas on the ground, on the bottom of the locker, and the peel's down there. And Tom kind of got mad, like, oh, whatever, and he cleaned off his books and dropped them in the bottom of the locker, and life went on. And I said, well, that was my prank, I'm not cleaning it up. Tom, you gotta clean it up. He's like, no, you did it, you cleaned it up. No one cleaned it up. Week goes by, it's starting to look a little nasty, it's biodegrading, it's starting to break down a little bit, and a couple more days, another week goes by, it smells now. It's rotting, it's getting bad. 3 weeks, 4 weeks goes by. I was standing my ground. I am not gonna clean that locker up. I'm not gonna do it. And then it got to a point I was just like, I just don't want to do it. But it got to the point where it was so bad after a month, a little more than a month, that students were complaining to the office because the smell was seeping through all of the lockers. And I distinctly remember a time. So he opened the locker. I was way away. He opened it, and people within a 10-foot radius all ran away because the smell was so bad, several of them going and throwing up in a trash bin. It was so bad. And eventually, because it was a big deal, Tom got talked to because it technically was his locker, and the janitor had to do it, and he didn't really get in trouble, but he kind of did. But it was my own prank, and I was like, I'm not cleaning it up. And I was just so lazy to do something so simple, even a couple days after. I was just so lazy, it's like I don't even want to bend down to pick up that up. I'm just too lazy to do it. So today, we are going to talk about this idea more and go more into depth with some of the stuff that I brought up last week. Work. And I gave you those 3 categories: physical work, mental work, and emotional work. And I also mentioned spiritual work, but that's going to be for next week. We're going to talk about spiritual work. So for today, physical work, mental work, and emotional work. All right, everyone. So first category we're going to talk about, physical work. You can see I have a bunch of tools here, my tools behind me, tools used to build stuff, used to fix stuff, and that's probably one of the first things we think of when we think of physical work. We think of tools, we think of jobs, we think of manual labor, and that is correct. Working with our hands, doing things that need to be done, fixing cars, even going to an office and doing stuff like that, and doing work at a computer, which obviously, like I said last week, it involves your mind, and these things cross over. But the thing is, where does it primarily fall? Am I primarily doing manual labor? Am I primarily using my mind? Even though all of it is always happening at the same time. But I want to read you a verse out of a passage in Colossians 3. And in Colossians 3, Paul is talking and he's giving guidelines for Christian homes. He's giving guidelines for fathers and mothers and children, so much like for you guys with your parents, and to slaves and masters, servants and masters. Now, Paul is not condoning slavery. The Bible does not support slavery, but it regulates it and attempts to fix the problem from within. So if you ever read a passage and it seems to talk about that, don't be discouraged. The Bible is not supporting slavery. And oftentimes when we read it, it's just more based on servanthood and not how we think of slavery today based on racial issues. But I'm going to read this passage. Paul says, "Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only when their eye is on you, but do it with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord." And then verse 23 here, "Whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart, as working for the Lord and not for human masters." So in this passage, Paul is telling servants to their masters, hey, work hard. Don't just do things when you know they're watching, but always work with all your heart. And he says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart. And we can take this principle of this, and we can take it to our day today, and to employees and employers, and to parents and their children, because just a verse before this, or a couple verses before it, it says, "Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord." When you obey your parents, when they tell you, hey, I want you to come help me fix this or do this, work with your hands, or they say, hey, I want you to help me clean the dishes, or hey, I want you to go do this chore, go do the laundry, whatever it is. When you obey your parents, the Bible says you're making God happy. God is looking down upon you. He already loves you. You can't make God love you more. Let me get that clear. There's nothing you can do to make God love you more or to make God love you less. But the Bible does say that he looks down and he smiles upon you. It makes him happy when you obey your parents. So when you obey your parents, when you listen to them, when you obey them, you're obeying God. So whatever work that's physical that you have to do, whether it's doing stuff with tools like you see behind me, whether it is doing dishes or laundry or sweeping, or some of you have animals in a farm working on there, whatever it is, when you obey your parents, when you do chores, when you work hard, you're not only pleasing your parents, you're pleasing God, and he looks down and he smiles on you for that. So that was physical work. What about mental work? Well, I want to read Matthew 22:37, which says, "Jesus replied to them, 'Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind.'" Now, in this passage, Jesus is not trying to cut you up into three pieces and saying, well, you have a heart, you have a body and a soul, you have a mind, and these parts all make you up. Now, that is true, but you can't separate them. Meaning, if I take my head, my mind away, which is in my head from top of my neck, if you take away my mind, well, I lose my life, I die. You take away my heart, well, I'm gone. If you take away my emotions, take away my soul, that's separating it from my body, that's being dead. That's what death is. Death is a separation. You can't separate these things because they work together to make a whole, a unit. But even so, they're different parts of us. And that's probably not something we think of too often. We don't think of loving Jesus with my mind. We think, well, I got to go to church and I got to share the gospel as my pastors tell me, and I got to do this. But how often do you think, I need to love God with my mind? Now, you can love God with your mind at school, because you know what? God has placed you where you live. You are going to the school God wanted you to go to. God's in control. And being educated is an important thing. You know what? If you weren't educated, if you didn't learn to read, which you learned from your parents and in school, you couldn't read the Bible. You couldn't share others. You couldn't study and grow in the Word. You wouldn't be able to interact with others. Your mind, going to school, being educated, and doing that is so important for the kingdom, for God. Mental work, going to school is very, very important. The Bible also says, Paul says in Romans 12, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And what he's talking about is how we can be living sacrifices, how we can worship God with our whole life. He says to do that, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And you know what that is? It's a daily thing. That's feeding your mind, feeding your life, which also feeds your soul and your heart, because we're all one unit, feeding it with godly things. That's why he says in Philippians, whatever's noble, whatever's true, whatever's praiseworthy and good and virtuous, think about those things. What you think transforms how you're going to continue to think in the future. Now, you know what? You don't have a choice for every thought that pops into your brain. We're sinful people. Things just come into our heads. But the Bible says when those things that are bad come in, take the thoughts captive. Make them a prisoner. So mental work, it has a lot more to do with school. It has a lot to do with everything you do when you're thinking and you're planning and you're analyzing. And it's very important. Our mental work is very important because your mind ultimately shapes the actions you make. Researchers have found that people who complain a lot tend to complain more and more and a lot, and that's just their natural disposition. When you complain, you start to create pathways in your brain, these neuron connections, and this has been shown, and those pathways get stronger. It's kind of like walking on a bridge. It's like putting one more nail down on the boards on the bridge to make it stronger, so that pathway is easier to walk on now. And when you stop complaining, when you stop thinking about those types of things, it's like popping out a nail. That bridge gets less unstable in the brain. And that sounds kind of weird, but that is actually going on in your head. That's why when you practice something, if you're practicing soccer, how to, kick the ball and to do the soccer things, the sports things. Clearly, I'm not a sports guy. When you're doing that, your brain it starts to teach your body physically how to do it better. So the mind and the body are connected in that way. Practice. That's why practice makes you better at things. The same way, what you feed into your mind is going to get easier and easier to think about and to do, which is why feeding your brain is just as important as feeding your body. Mental work. What are you putting into your brain? What are you thinking about? And are you lazy or are you hardworking in the area of mental work? And last but not least, emotional work. Now, I decided to come into our youth room here because you know what, all you guys, I've been coming to this church building for the last 6 weeks, pretty much by myself. I'm here with Pastor Brian, and on Sunday mornings, if you guys have been joining in with the live stream on Facebook or watching the Sunday morning service videos later, you can see there's a couple more people here, and I get to see them on Sunday mornings as we're a group 10 or under to produce the worship service for all of you. I've basically been here alone with Brian, and we're kind of, we're doing our own work for 6 weeks now, and it pains my heart to not be here with all of you. And what pains me more is thinking about when we do have the opportunity to be together. We do have the opportunity to encourage each other, be friends to each other before pandemic like we're in right now, that we choose not to. We say, I don't want to go to church. Nah, I don't want to hang out with them, or nah, I don't want to go help, or whatever it is. Emotional work is so important, and emotional work is so important because relationships, friendships, those we have with all different people, are the glue. It's the glue of the entire created order. It's how God made everything. God himself is 3 persons in a perfect relationship with each other. In Colossians 3:12-14, Paul says, therefore, as God's holy and chosen people, dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with one another. Forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against each other, forgive as the Lord forgave you, and put on love above all else, because this binds all of these together in perfect unity. See, you guys, relationships are the glue of everything. People get hired at jobs. They get recommended to jobs because, oh, I know that guy. You ever hear that phrase? Oh, I know them. They're cool. Oh, I know them. They'll be good. Don't worry. I know him. I know her. I want you to think about your relationships. I want you to think about those people you know, your friends, your family, whoever, all the people who you interact with. And think about those people who give their time to you. Right now, take a moment. Think. Who gives time to me? Who writes me letters? Who sends me notes? Who has taken an active interest in my life? And now think, do you do that for them? If so, awesome. But then think past it. Do you do that for others? Do you give of your time? Do you give emotional work? Do you invest in emotionally working? Do you pray for others? That's possibly one of the greatest ways to put emotional work in. I really think it needs to go beyond that, but that's the starting point. Do you pray for those people? Do you put time and effort into your relationships? Much like when we come here, and I'm looking forward to when we can come back here. You guys, it's really put a spiritual hole in my life, not being able to see all of you, not being able to be here. Relationships are the glue to this world. Are you investing? Are you working hard at emotional work? We're called to work as if we are directly working for God. That's exactly from Colossians 3, when Paul was talking about work heartily as if it's for the Lord, because then a verse or two later he says, because guess what? Everything you do is directly for God, because he made all of this. He's given you everything. When you work, you're working for him. And I got to be honest with all of you, as I've been preparing this and filming this, it's been convicting to me for me to think of where I have been extremely lazy in my heart and in my life regarding work. Different areas have been okay. And just thinking about my general laziness and how it made me think back to that story about the mashed up bananas and how I was just lazy, and how because I was lazy it caused people to throw up. It affected me negatively, it affected other people negatively. And now this week, as you're watching this, my challenge for you, really similar to last week, is to evaluate your work ethic. To really start to evaluate, okay, in these three areas, the physical, the mental, and the emotional work, how lazy am I, or how hardworking am I? So similar to last week, how I had you take out a piece of paper, I want you to do that again. I want you to take out a piece of paper and I want you to write those three things down. Now, instead of giving yourself a grade, I want you to think about the grade that you gave yourself last week. And this week, what I want you to do is to write down specific examples, specific ways that you work. You know, you want to put down specific classes or different, just school in general, whatever you want to do. I want you to write down different things, all the ways you can think of. I work this way with mental work. I work in doing these things for physical work. It's going to be different for some of you. Write that all down, and I want you to circle at least one in each category that you think I need to be better at this. And then I want you to evaluate which category, physical, mental, or emotional, do I need to do better on? Do I really need to focus this summer on? And I really want you to focus this summer on one of those categories. Because God, I bet, is calling to your mind one of these things. Physical, mental, or emotional. And God cares about it. God cares about you. He cares about what you do with your heart, your mind, your time, your relationships. He cares. And he calls us to work hard, because being lazy in the Bible is a very, very serious thing. And the reason for that is because we're made for Mondays. We're made to work. It's before sin. Sin makes it tough, but we need to face the consequences of our sin. And part of the consequences of our sin is work kind of being stinky sometimes, and we don't want to do it. So evaluate yourself, circle those things at which you know I need to work on. And then with your leaders this week, they're going to ask you about how are you going to work on those things this week, this month, and this summer. We're made for Mondays. Rest has its purpose, and we're going to talk about that. In fact, we're going to talk about that in 2 weeks. Next week, we're going to talk about spiritual work. And in 2 weeks, we're going to talk about how not we were made to work, which that's what we've been talking about. We're going to talk about how we were made to rest. So stay tuned for that. Hope you guys have a great day. Thanks for coming out and checking out the video, and I hope you guys have a great time in your small groups.